What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are going to be taking a look at some of the latest Detroit Lions news. The Lions have made some roster moves today, and that includes a new addition to their cornerback room, which I'm pretty excited about. Also, we have some unfortunate news on the injury side. Plus, we're going to be taking a look at some of Jerry Jacobs' first start against the Vikings because I thought it was pretty darn good. So let's get it started.
We're going to bite a kneecap off, and we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down. And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap, and we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down. And when we do, we're going to take another hunk out of you. Before long, we're going to be the last one standing.
Welcome everybody to our video. Glad you guys are here. We've got a few things to talk about in today's video. Now, I do want to make a quick announcement. There was no Last Second Dose show yesterday, Monday. It was canceled. So you didn't miss anything. There just was no show yesterday. But the plan is to be back on for Thursday. And we may even take a look at some film, possibly, maybe, because we do have the All-22 film. We'll take a look at some of that today as we take a look at some of this Jerry Jacobs' first start. But there's a lot of things to talk about in today's video. So I guess let's just dive into it. Let's start off with some of the unfortunate news first, and this is with Frank Ragnow. So Frank Ragnow was already placed on IR, I think last week, with the version of turf toe is what Dan Campbell called it. So he was already on IR, so it's not like it's going to be a new addition to that. But unfortunately, he is going to be out for the rest of the season with season-ending surgery on his toe. Okay, so it was a version of turf toe. They put him on IR. We weren't sure when he was going to come back. Well, now it has been reported that he's going to be out for the season with surgery to get prepared for the 2022 season. So unfortunately, obviously, this is a huge loss. We talked a little bit about it in an earlier video today, but not a ton with Frank Ragnow. We do have Evan Brown that's filling into that role, and he did a pretty nice job as well yesterday. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't Frank Ragnow, like the backup that we do have at that spot. We also added Ryan McCollum, as we talked about in the past, to be the backup for Evan Brown. Season-ending toe injury because of the surgeries that he's going to have. He spoke with the doctor, and he said that it was necessary that he had it. So a very unfortunate news there. We definitely hate to hear that. I mean, Frank Ragnow, one of the best players on this team. All right, so this is bad news, and we've had a lot of bad news recently with the injuries, whether it's Quintez Cephas. I mean, it's just left and right. It's piling on, but maybe we'll get some good news soon, hopefully tomorrow, with some of these guys that could come back, your Deckers, your Tyrell. We'll just have to wait and see how that goes, but obviously this is really just not good news. But I do like the backup that we have. Frank Ragnow, though, is just a difference maker. So you hate to hear it, wishing for a full recovery, and that hopefully, next year he comes back and he's better than ever. I'm sure he will be. The guy plays through literally everything. So you know that it's very legitimate that he had to have this done. I mean, the guy was playing that he couldn't even talk last year. So a lot of respect to Frank Ragnow. You just hate to hear this, especially after, giving him the big paycheck, the big contract. To have him out for the season is it's a very big loss. So that's what I want to start with. However, the next news that we have is that the Lions have made some practice squad moves today. We'll start there first. The Lions have released tight end Jared Pinkney off of their practice squad. This was an addition during the season that they added to this room. They had a couple of other tight ends on their practice squad, and one of those names were Shane Zylstra, who was actually brought up to the active roster this past week against the Vikings for that game because TJ Hawkinson was dealing with a little bit of an injury and he had a short practice week. He did play. He was fine. We didn't really need Shane Zylstra, but he was brought up. He was the guy the Lions went with. So knowing that, I guess it's not really necessary that you have all these tight ends. In replacing that, the Lions have re-signed wide receiver Javon McKinley to the practice squad. Kind of corresponds with the Quintez Cephas update with the broken shoulder. So with that, Quintez Cephas is going to be placed on IR, which is obviously going to open up a spot, which is where the Lions add the player, which we'll get into. But this is just a practice squad move, probably just to have more depth at that receiver position. They do have Geronimo Allison also on the practice squad. They do have a guy like Tom Kennedy who is still on the 53-man roster, even though he's usually inactive. But this is just another move to add some more depth to that receiver position. So I thought I would point it out. Not a huge move, but it is something to make note of. However, the big move today comes with the Lions adding a cornerback to their roster. Now, this wasn't via a trade. This was a player off of a practice squad, and this comes from the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Lions have signed rookie Mark Gilbert off of the Pittsburgh Steelers practice squad to their roster in light of the Quintez Cephas. Him going to IR is going to open up that roster spot, so the Lions will have a roster spot open, which is now going to go, for at least the meantime, to Mark Gilbert, the cornerback from the Steelers. You have to sign the guy off of the practice squad to the roster. You have to do that. So with the spot open, the Lions went with some more cornerback depth. And I think first off, this was just necessary in general to get more cornerback depth. Talked about it for a little while now. The Lions, they should probably add some more cornerback depth. And I was definitely on the train of possibly trading for a cornerback, just adding some cornerback help. Now we're going to talk about Jerry Jacobs a little bit later in this video because I thought he played a pretty darn good, basically you call it debut, first start against the Minnesota Vikings. And I think the Lions have a really nice option there going forward with Jerry Jacobs. But they also just needed some depth, plus this adds more competition, but they needed depth because if something happened to Jacobs, you'd be back with Bobby Price as your next cornerback up. Behind that, you really don't have another outside option. You know, you have a Corey Ballentine who, you know, could be, I guess, an outside option if you really needed to go there in a pinch. Nickel Roby-Coleman, he is a slot cornerback. I know he's on your practice squad, but he's not an outside corner. He can't play outside corner, so he doesn't give you that kind of versatility. So the Lions just needed depth first off in general, and because the roster spot was open, it made sense that they went out and added another cornerback for depth. But this is also a player that I'm not going to say is going to take Jacobs' job because I highly doubt that. And I like what Jacobs did in week 1. That's why we're going to talk about it. But this is a corner that I do like. And I was actually pretty excited to see this name as someone that the Lions side, a very high upside player that also had his college career kind of just taken away from him because of injuries. I mean, just injuries on top of injuries on top of injuries is what derailed this college career, which was so promising off the start. I mean, he came into Duke, which is where he played his college career for 4 seasons. He came into Duke and started as an outside corner as a true freshman, and that's what he did in the ACC. His second year as a sophomore was one of the best seasons we've seen for a cornerback in college football. The guy had 6 interceptions. This is 1 year, 13 games, 6 interceptions, basically an interception every other game, and including 21, depends on who you're looking at, some say 15, some say 21, passes defended, all right? NCAA records, we're talking here, Duke records. The guy was so good in his sophomore season that after that year, I mean, if you look at just where draft charts had him, I mean, they had him flying up there like one of the top cornerbacks in the draft class. But that's unfortunately when things just went really, really wrong. The last 2 years of his college career, he would only play in 4 combined games, and it was just cut short. There wasn't a lot to look at there. He did have an interception in 2020, which was his first one going back to 2017, which was that sophomore season. And it was a pretty big deal when he had that interception. But, I mean, you even look at that 2020 season. He only played in 2 games, right? He played in 1 game against Notre Dame, which we have some clips from, and then his second game is where he had the interception. But he just hasn't played a ton since then, and he also doesn't look like the same player. Now, sure, the sample size is much smaller, but he didn't look like maybe the same guy. He had a very serious hip injury, and then he went undrafted. So a guy that had so much hype after that sophomore season went undrafted. He was picked up by the Pittsburgh Steelers. We did get to see him in the preseason, but unfortunately the NFL Game Pass does not give you all 22 from preseason. Really know why they don't. I don't know. Maybe so it makes it much more difficult to really look at his preseason film and say, hey, he looks better or he looks worse, so this is what he's good at. So you have to look at kind of that broadcast view, and we do have a couple of clips that I looked at there, and you know, there was some good moments and there was also some not so good moments, particularly with flags that we saw show up there. I feel like I have a pretty good feel of what kind of player this is as of right now. He's still very young. I mean, the guy's a rookie, but I remember looking at him back in the draft process and I was like, you know, man, this guy's interesting. I don't know if he's worth a draft pick, and that's why I don't think I ever made a video on him, because I don't know if I necessarily thought that he was worth a late round draft pick because of the injuries and the inconsistencies at the end of his career. But that big peak that he had was very enticing, and it was like, dang, he was so good as a sophomore. How do you not take notice of this player? I mean, that's just incredibly good. Reward, low risk pickup as a UDFA, and I think that's what the Steelers did. Now, the Steelers, they have some solid cornerbacks, of course. I mean, above him, there was multiple guys above him, like Joe Hayden, like Justin Lane, Sutton. I mean, there was multiple players that were above him, but we saw a pretty good amount of him in the preseason. There was good, there was bad. The game that we actually saw him the least amount was when he played us. We only saw him for like 3 minutes. I mean, the last 3 minutes of the game he came in. We barely saw him in that game, and that's because for most of that game, they actually played their starters against us. If you guys remember back to the preseason, that was week 2 of the preseason. They played 4 preseason games because they also played in the Hall of Fame preseason game. So that was the game that he played the least amount, and you saw him one time match up with Tom Kennedy, and he was burnt by Kennedy into the slot, and that kind of gives you an overview of one, I think, his biggest weaknesses. But let's do this. Let's talk about who he is for a second. You throw up his relative athletic score, and there's some good numbers here. You see 13 bench press reps, you see the speed, the 10-yard split is very impressive, the 40-yard dash 4.48, which is pretty solid as well. It's not that bad. I think that's similar to Jeff Okuda's, if I'm not mistaken. I think. Actually, let me look that up, because now that I said that, that's actually stuck in my head now. Hold on. Jeff Okuda, for perspective, also ran a 4.48 40. Now, this was back in college, of course, and we know his first year he had a lot of injuries, and we barely saw him this year. He looked good, though, in training camp. Anyway, this is not about Okuda. Okuda also ran a 4.48 40, which is above league average for cornerbacks, just throwing it out there. But, you know, the 40-yard dash is just a 40-yard dash. I mean, he came out as a pretty skinny cornerback. He's bulked up a little bit since, you know, early in his college football career. He's put on about 15, 20 pounds. He went from about 175 to about 190 at this point. So he's bulked up a little bit, but he's a pretty aggressive corner, even though he's a really slim corner. He's got some size to him, pretty good height. He's also got some really nice length, which shows up as well. Interesting note, he's a cousin of Darrelle Revis. Okay, we all know who Darrelle Revis is. Revis Island, okay? With the Steelers, he didn't make the final 53-man roster. He was cut during that time when they were cutting down to their 53-man roster. He was cut August 31st, but he ended up back on their practice squad. What I like about Mark Gilbert, first off, their special teams ability here, okay? This guy can play punt coverage. You see him on special teams. He has the attitude for it. So if you want to talk about how do you find your way onto the field, the coaches always say it starts with special teams. Well, he brings that ability to the table. It's probably a big reason why they actually brought him in, because that's a place to start, is that he does have that special teams ability. I also do like his mentality. The guy is not afraid to hit. He's not afraid to tackle. He's not the biggest guy. He may not be the best tackler either, but he's definitely not afraid to tackle in open space. He's willing to get involved, and actually sometimes to a fault, he can be a little bit overly aggressive, like hitting guys late, things like that. He can be a little bit overly aggressive, a little bit overly handsy, can get called for calls in the back end, making hits as well. But at the same time, I do love the aggressiveness that he brings. He's very willing to get physical off the line of scrimmage, bump and run, things like that. And he actually really needs that part of his game with his length to really help him out in some of the weaknesses that he does have in coverage. But he's definitely a very willing hitter. With run defense real quick, I think one of the biggest weaknesses here is getting off of blockers, okay? Specifically at the second level. I mean, you're picked up by receivers, things like that. He doesn't shed blocks that well. Usually if he gets connected with, he can be completely driven out of the play. So that's consistently shown up as an issue going back to college. Even since bulking up a little bit for the NFL, he still shows a problem of dealing with those guys. But heck, I mean, I look at our receivers and I'm like, hey, you can't get much better practice than this in terms of shedding blocks as a cornerback, because we got some really good blocking receivers, aside from that screen that went really bad. But we got receivers that will block. He's just not great at shedding blocks. He's willing to tackle. He's not great at shedding blocks, which can lead to some issues. He understands, forcing things back inside, but shedding and then making a tackle, you just don't see a ton of that. So that does show up as an issue. I think his best fit is as an outside cornerback. I don't see a ton of usage here as trying to be a slot corner, and the Lions don't need that. They have A.J. Parker. They have a Roby Coleman on the practice squad. They don't need another slot corner. They need a depth at outside corner. Now, he does have experience lining up in the slot. It's not really his best spot, but he does have experience doing it. So on certain packages the Lions do defensively, we've seen Amani from time to time get lined up in the slot just based on the personnel on the field, how the play is designed. Sometimes you'll be lined up there, and he has experience doing it, so it's not something that's going to be new to him. But as a spot for him, the majority of downs, you want him outside as an outside cornerback. You don't want to put this guy in the slot, because I think that really shows his biggest weaknesses. And I think we saw it on the play against the Lions. He was put in the slot, lined up against Tom Kennedy, and takes Mark Gilbert. He ends up actually running into his own safety, and it turns into a huge gain for Tom Kennedy. He just shook him off the line there. So those smaller, shiftier receivers, that's not where you necessarily want him. That's actually one of his biggest weaknesses, I think, is some of that change of direction, flipping his hips, turning, running, change of direction as a cornerback. I think that's maybe one of his biggest weaknesses. We've seen a lot of similar things with how the Steelers like to utilize their cornerbacks, some of the, coverages that they like to use in the back end as well. But in zone coverage, he's got really good eyes. Okay, he's a ball hawk. When you have 6 picks in a season, including 21 pass defended, that's not, by mistake. That's you're doing things right. The things that he does the best to me is I like him in zone coverage, being able to keep his eyes in the backfield, because he is a ball hawk. He does pretty well on jumping on routes. But keep his eyes in the backfield, use that explosiveness, that length to jump down on routes and make plays on the football. Playing off-man coverage when things are in front of him, when he can come down and make plays, when he can break on routes. We saw the Pittsburgh Steelers play a lot of inside leverage, and I think that is where some issues do show up on getting beat inside, specifically off the release. He's had that speed to run long with you. So if you try to hit him with a vertical route and he's up in coverage, he can turn and run long, and he does track the ball pretty darn well. You can see it. Many people note this of him as well. I mean, he just reads really well some of these hitches. He jumps down. He's aggressive. He gives me some Slave vibes, honestly, in that area of where, hey, I see the play. I'm going to kind of let it go by, and then I'm going to jump down and make a play on the football. Those hitches, he shoots down them. Now, there was a really weird one in the preseason, which I noticed against Brendan Eagles, where he jumped down on the route and then he was kind of hesitated and stopped, and it was a completion. They got a pretty nice gain out of it. This is a man coverage example, so he's not reading the quarterback here. He's just reading the receiver, and he reads this route from the receiver, this hitch, and he jumps on extremely quickly. They're giving a lot of cushion because of the lead, but it looks like maybe he gets there a little too quick, and then he doesn't pick on where the ball is, so at that point he kind of stops himself. That way he doesn't beat the ball to the play, and it just gets weird. Fortunately, the injuries continued in 2020. 2020, he returns, and we hear the assistant defensive coach say this is the same Mark Gilbert we all know and love, but that wasn't really the case. If you watch him back in 2020, he only played in 2 games, but heading into that year, we're expecting to get this healthy Mark Gilbert, and he just didn't look like the same guy. I mean, you look at that Notre Dame game, he just didn't look the same, and it's hard to find, like, well, his technique was messed up. You're just like, what's wrong with the guy? And I can't say it was specifically this, but after the 2 games that he played in, he was diagnosed with loose bone structure in his right foot. That don't even sound good. So because of that, he opted out of the season. He had surgery to prepare for the draft. Just looks slow. I mean, tight ends, guys are just running and pulling away from him, and it just does not look right. I mean, I understand, there's rust or things like that, but just speed-wise, he didn't look like the 4.48 speed player. He didn't look like the same guy. However, in the preseason, he looked much quicker than he did, which usually just does not add up because NFL players, I mean, it's just a different level in the NFL. So that's the weird thing. Notre Dame just looked rough. It looked rough all over the place. But the preseason arguably looked better. Now, one thing you'll notice with Gilbert is he is a little handsy in the back end. And back in college, he did a pretty good job of getting away with this without getting flags, using his hands, being a little bit physical. And if you watch Jacobs when we get to the film, he played the same way against Minnesota. He's a little physical down the field, but it's not something that he would get called for flags left and right. Just like Jacobs didn't get called for any flags in our game. They're a little physical. They play with some contact down the field, especially in the first 5 yards. They like to touch you.
I think here you see a little bit of that recovery explosiveness like we saw in the RES score and the length. So he oversteps a little bit on this receiver out fake, but he gets himself back into play, uses those long arms, and makes a great play on the football. This is a really cool recovery here from Gilbert. This one you really don't see develop, but you can see at the end it's kind of a comeback route, looks like on the rollout, and just how fast he closes on this. Again, get his arms in there and makes a play on the ball.
Allows guys to beat him inside. If you notice with the Steelers, he played a lot of inside leverage. I mean, sometimes that's just a play design. Sometimes it's where the receiver's lining up. And sometimes you play inside leverage. It shows a little bit more trust that you have in your cornerbacks to be able to get out there and make a play on an out route, right? If it's some deep out route, deep comeback route, that he's going to be able to get out there and make a play on the football.
Both defenders here are playing inside leverage. They're trying to force this play outside. So you can see when Mark, as soon as he realizes it's going underneath, he shoots this down and cuts the lane off. Now the ball doesn't go his way, but he does get back into the play and helps him, wraps up, makes the tackle here.
Overall, I was excited to see this name because I know this is a player with a lot of high upside, a lot of high potential here with this addition. I don't even know if we'll see him defensively. The Lions, first off, they just needed depth defensively. And I was excited to see this addition because actually I remember watching back in the preseason looking for Brennan Eagles for the Cowboys. And I saw him like, oh, that's Mark Gilbert. And I actually even pointed out when we were watching some Brennan Eagles. And now here he is as a Lion. So it's crazy how things happen like that. But I do like this addition like this. It's not like the Lions used a draft pick on him. They picked him up. We'll see how it goes. But this is kind of exciting. And the Lions needed cornerback depth. So I'm just happy there. But now let's talk about Jerry Jacobs a little bit because there was some questions about, hey, the number 2 cornerback spot. Price didn't play well for a couple of weeks in a row. So you gave Jerry Jacobs a nod. Dan Campbell said he deserves a shot. And he had his first start in the NFL against the Vikings. And I got to say, a lot of times matched up against Adam Thielen, he did a pretty darn good job. So let's take a look at that a little bit.
I wanted to take a few looks at some clips from this Jerry Jacobs first start. And the first thing that caught my eye was his communication. Right off the bat, the communication between him and the other rookie, A.J. Parker. A.J. slides, takes Thielen. And, of course, Jerry Jacobs does his job. He takes the flat, limits this gain. I thought that was just a great thing that stuck out because we know he had some issues with that with Bobby a couple of weeks. And just a little bit of action to Jerry Jacobs playing some outside leverage here, playing on this little short route where Kirk wants to go, but it's taken away. And I love the little celebration after the incomplete. I just want to start off with some highlight. We start off here with a man coverage rep for Jerry Jacobs. You get the motion. He's going to stay in man. He's not looking in the backfield. And I'm assuming Will Harris, who's sliding into the box right now, his 2 is the tight end, but his tight end does not go out. So it looks like he's free on this play. So he drops back in his zone coverage. But I like Jerry here. So man coverage, you get a speed release from Thielen, but Thielen's going to attack the body of Jacobs, trying to create separation so he can break back inside. But look at Jacobs gives no ground here. Doesn't allow him to get any separation. Shout out to Jalen, who slides back, gets really good depth and slows down it. Basically, they take away the crosser. See how this goes throughout the season, but as a defensive back, you're allowed to maintain continuous contact with a receiver through these first 5 yards as long as you're in front of the receiver. And right now, he's doing a pretty good job of that. Now, once past 5 yards, you see that he releases, and then he's just got to stick with him out of coverage. So we'll see how this goes throughout the season, but he didn't get called for any kind of illegal contact in this game. Another man coverage rep here from Jerry Jacobs, and you could see that slot cornerback, A.J. Parker, looks like he's also in man, so he's not able to play outside leverage because he's going to have that outside help with this much space outside the numbers for Adam Thielen here. So he's actually playing a little inside leverage. Another man coverage, you can see Jacobs gets a little physical off the line, but watch this fake break inside. Jacobs doesn't try to undercut or anything like that. He just sticks right in the hip, and he takes away any of the out route look. Again, no space for Thielen. There's just a lot of good here. Lions are going to go to a zone drop. This is 3rd down, so they're playing playing a lot of softer coverage in the back end. They're going to drop Jalen. They're going to drop Alex. They're going to drop Trey. First off, notice Charles Harris getting his hands up on this fake to take it away and force Kirk Cousins to fake this. But I like Jerry Jacobs here, okay? Watch out Jerry Jacobs. As soon as his guy breaks underneath, he drops back to take away this corner route. And if he doesn't, there's a lot of space here for Kirk Cousins to let this thing fly. It's a good job for Harris getting his hands up, but because Jerry Jacobs gets depth, as soon as his guys goes underneath, they take it away. This must be one of those rare plays where both of your outside cornerbacks are maybe doing the wrong thing, possibly. I don't know for sure. I'm sure they'll look at this back at the film, but Amani's on the top, Jacobs is on the bottom here. And notice both of their receivers are going to cut inside. Now, Amani does late. He drops off and gets depth because you have Jacobs and you have Jalen. Those guys are playing through the hook curls underneath, and they're both going to take these underneath crossers. I think Jacobs needs to drop back as soon as this guy breaks like he did earlier and get depth. This time he doesn't, and neither does Amani until it's like really late. They could have threw it to his side too. More zone coverage here in the back end. So the cornerbacks, the defensive backs, they have their eyes in the backfield. So this helps Jacobs a ton. You can see his guy goes in motion, so he slides in a little bit. But you just need to really just set this edge here, and he does a really good job. There's one earlier where he kind of bounced back in, but he just sets it really well. You can see just mirrors the running back perfectly here. Gets out on the edge, makes a fantastic play, no gain. This is another quick read here from Jacobs at the bottom in this zone coverage, and it looks like right now his guy that he's keying right now is this right side tight end, and as soon as he notices the tight end does not come out for a route, as soon as it happens, he sees him go to block, Jacobs drops and he gets depth. And all the cornerbacks at the top, they're kind of funneling in, the safety slides down to take away the slot, and he takes away this route. Now it's good pressure from the Lions. I think Flowers gets the sack here. Another man coverage look at the top of the screen here. They're going to attack Jacobs the same way. They're going right into his body. He's going to play physical with him, but this time they get a little bit of that push off, and that creates a lot of separation, and Jacobs doesn't really have that kind of makeup speed to get back into it. You can see right here when Kirk goes to throw, he looks like he's trying to undercut, and he's like, oh, wait, I can't do it. I can't get underneath that, so he comes back into the play, but it was a drop pass, and he was there for the drop pass. Jacobs in the slot. This looks basically textbook of what he's allowed to do here. 5 yards, continuous contact, as long as he stays in front of the receiver, and that's exactly what happens on this little wheel route that they're going to try to hit him with. First off, he's lined up in a slot. Secondly, this is Justin Jefferson, and I love it. Look how he's on top, continuous. He's got 5 yards to remain that contact, and then he releases, and then he's just going to stick in that hip. This hurts to watch back like the Ravens game. I hate to relive it, but I at least want to show it. Campbell was asked about these plays, and he said on this play, A.J. Parker was in the slot here, needs to drop and get depth. That way Jacobs can take away. You see both outside corners are just playing outside leverage because, of course, they don't want to allow anybody to go out of bounds with the time situation. I think this is what DC is talking about. Right here, he wants Jacobs to drop, get depth. That way they can take this little, short little zig route to the outside, to the flats, because Jacobs is playing the outside leverage anyway. He can go down and make that tackle, and it's a much less of a gain. They still have to waste the timeout. Dan didn't really explain this play and what went wrong, but it looks like the Vikings had a really good play design for it. They're going to have both their tight ends leak out, which is kind of going to take the two over the middle flat guys out of the play. It's going to occupy those two. And Jacobs and Amani, if you watch both outside corners, they're playing outside leverage. Same thing, they're forcing both guys back inside. First off, Kirk stares on the right side, which holds the center fielder Marlowe, but at the same time, having that underneath route occupies him and allows the deeper pass over the middle because he can't see that. It's just pretty well done. I want to leave you with one more play because I think this is where communication is just so crucial. And I think it's a well-designed play here by the Vikings. But you have Barnes, Flowers, and Jacobs all in the mix. So you have two rookies, and you have Trey Flowers playing a little bit of a new role. And this is where you see an issue. All right, fullback C.J. Ham on the left side, he's going to run out and do a wheel route, which is ultimately where Jacobs is going to take. Then you have the running back out the backfield, who a little late is going to run into the flat, which is ultimately where Derek Barnes is going to go. But it ultimately leaves Trey Flowers in no man's land on this play. So Barnes is going to play through the hook curl into the flat. All right, but I feel like there needs to be a communication here between him and Flowers. All right, so Barnes is here. He takes the hook. Jerry Jacobs does a good job seeing that, and he's going to drop back and take this wheel route. Flowers knows he's not going to take the wheel route. So Jacobs realizes what's going on. He seals the wheel. He takes it deep. Good job there. But there's no communication between Barnes and Flowers. So Barnes drops down on the flat, and because of that, no one is taking over the middle. I feel like maybe there needs to be some communication of Barnes saying, hey, Flowers, go run down to the flat, instead of him just being standing there. Because if you have Flowers trying to cover that over middle, you're just at a big disadvantage.